I did the very silly mistake of not clicking record on my OBS. So here I am doing another one. So hopefully this one goes just as well, if not better. So with that said, I'm going to be taking you guys through the time lapse and talking you through the process, all of the things that went through my mind as I was working on this piece. It's a piece that I really enjoyed working on, and it was also well received by a lot of people. And those two things rarely happen together, right? Sometimes you'd work on a piece that you think would do well, but then people seem to not respond so well to it. And then in another moment, you do a piece where you think that, no one's gonna like it, but I'll just throw it up anyways. And people end up liking it. And of course, in the end, the most important thing is that you enjoy doing it, and it's something that you're proud of. And this is certainly a piece that I'm really proud of. It's the most detailed and finished piece that I've done on Procreate. Up until this point, I've just been doing a lot of much more simpler pieces where I'm just focusing on a study, keeping it very close to reference image, and not doing things such as designing and pushing the storytelling. However, after doing quite a few of them, I started to get the itch to want to make these pieces a little bit more of my own. And one of the pieces that I've done before this is the piece where you have the lizard coming back home after fishing. You can probably see that I like to do pieces that involve fish. And that was the piece where I discovered that I really enjoyed doing painting for the backgrounds and then line work for the characters. However, the big lesson that I learned there was to actually do planning for the characters ahead of time. Because if you don't, it'll really affect the composition. So you can clearly see that I built the composition with the characters in mind this time. So let's just jump into the time lapse and I'll talk you guys through it. So usually when I start off my sketches, I try to keep the perspective lines quite simple. The reason why is that when the perspective lines are a little bit too dense and a little bit too precise, I think we all know that there's this temptation to draw on them. And when you do that, it feels like everything is very stiff and restricted by the grid. So by keeping your perspective lines very loose, you're able to preserve the dynamism of your sketch. It's not to say you can't bring it back in later, of course, a more precise perspective grid in order to troubleshoot, but at least for the initial stage, keep it very sparse. And for this piece, I kept a couple of things close to the original reference image. You can see that the composition has largely remained the same, and in terms of the general theme and subject matter of a fishing village, I've kept that. However, how I decided to make it a little bit of my own is thinking about how can I actually make it a little bit more interesting? How can I make this fishing village a little bit more fantastical? One of the first things that I thought about, how about doing a scene that isn't filled with normal humans, but maybe with another anthropomorphic creature? And if there's anything that cartoons have taught us, is that cats love fish, right? And being a cat person myself, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to indulge in that. So I decided to make cat people inhabiting this village. With that in mind, my mind started to think about, okay, if there were cat people in this village, how would that reflect in the architecture? So I decided to make the architecture cat shaped. You can see with the bulbous body and then the pointed roofs looking like cat ears. This subtle or maybe a little bit on the nose cat motifs that I decided to put into it. I think it's okay sometimes to do these kinds of simpler designs, right? Not all of it has to be very obscure. Not all of it has to be very deep and layered that you need intimate knowledge of a subject matter to even begin to understand it. There's moments for that, but for me, my general approach when it comes to my personal pieces is to think a little bit about it like how I enjoy my food. I like simple street food, something that a lot of people from all different walks of life that are able to just appreciate it. and something that's heartwarming and cozy to eat. So I'd like to think that my art reflects that kind of philosophy. I want it to be simple enough to understand for people of all ages and making it feel heartwarming. At this point right here, one of the things I'm trying to do is define the materials, the contrasting materials of the architecture. In the original reference image, a lot of it was just made out of wood. However, in order to make things more interesting, I think it's good to have a lot of contrast, a lot of variety. So instead of just having wood, you can see that I have stone that's used as the base, and even for the main body, it's a form of stone, maybe with some plaster on it as well. And the roof is mostly made out of straw and with some bamboo. And of course, most of the docks are made out of planks of wood, and you have the cloth material too. And one of the things that I really try to do with my pieces is environmental storytelling. I think we as humans, we tend to understand stories better through the medium of people. So having characters interacting with the scene or doing a certain action, that's one of the easiest ways for us to tell a story, right? Or through words. However, I do believe that environments are a great medium for you to tell stories through. And one of the things that you can do in order to convey that is by showing weathering. Weathering allows you to show that an environment or an object has gone through history and has had people interacting with it. So even if you have a scene without any characters, you can show that people or creatures or anything has interacted with it before. And because the environment here is mostly made out of water, it would stand to reason that a lot of moss would grow. So one of the things that I try to show is the areas of this environment that interact the most with water. In this case, the base of the architecture is going to be the mossiest. And some of the areas that a lot of the cats have interacted with, such as the docks and even the walls of the houses, maybe because they walk through it, maybe they bump some objects into it, you're going to get chips and cracks. So you're going to want to show that through the weathering on those materials. And with the roof, maybe because of rain as well, or just moisture in the air, it will gradually get a little bit discolored too. And I like showing these kinds of imperfections. And you can see the rope as well, maybe during a bit of a higher tide or waves sloshing onto it, it gets enough moisture that some algae gets caught in it. And after a certain time, I decide to move on to characters. I think at this point in the piece, I was just feeling like I needed a little bit of a break from the architecture. In fact, I felt like I've done a lot of work on the architecture and it was about time to bring the characters up to a similar level. And you can see that I decided to do the characters with line work. And that's a nice way to just create contrast, right? With most of the environment being painting, when you have a character in line work, it immediately stands out. However, I think because of us being so used to seeing animations done in this way, and they do it for the sake of being more economical, I think we understand it as objects that are going to move. And perhaps because of that reason, it somehow just feels like the characters are in movement. I don't know if it's just me though. And while I talked about subtle storytelling before, one of the things that I also mentioned was more overt storytelling through characters. So here, I wanted to show what daily life in this environment would be like. Because there's a lot of water, and perhaps because most of the time you're surrounded by water, I thought that boats would be an integral part to the lifestyle of these cats. So a lot of activities will revolve around that, and even people's livelihoods as well. So with the cat in the foreground, he's a fisherman. However, with these two cats that are currently being drawn, they are maybe a little bit younger. They don't have too much to do at home, so they like to spend their days causing mischief around the town. And you can see with their expressions that they're up to no good. And even with the character that's at the front of the boat seems to be pointing to the cat in the foreground, almost hinting at, oh, I'm gonna come get you, something like that, to maybe show that the cat in the foreground has good relationship with them and know that they don't have any bad intention. He's just smiling and kind of like, those kids again. And I'm going back to the water now, trying to define it. And water was something that I really struggled with this, and I don't think I'm in a position to be an authority to talk about how to render water properly. I'm quite happy with how it turned out, don't get me wrong, but there's so many properties to water that I still don't understand yet. Some of them being the reflectivity of it, but then at the same time you're able to see through it, and when you see certain objects through it, there's going to be refraction as well. Then there's subsurface scattering, and how cloudy and murky the water is will affect how it looks as well. But it's also one of the reasons why I decided to choose to do a piece in this setting. I'm not familiar with it. It's one way to spice things up. I really enjoy sunny scenes, usually set in forests or mountains, but I want to branch out a little bit. And you can also see that I've started adding in fish in the basket, and all sorts of fish too, because that's one way you can show that there's more to this environment, right? That these fishermen also employ different fishing methods to capture it. One of the things that I've just done in the time lapse was showing that there's some octopus and fish drying on some racks. And this is what I like to do in order to hint that there is a certain timeline and process of objects in different states. With the fish in the basket that have just been caught and seeing some of them being hung, you can look at those clues and piece them together and realize that, oh, okay, so after they get caught, they get hung up. And one way you can even push this even further is thinking about, okay, maybe I can show them cooking it or eating it. So now you're going to make all these connections that fish gets caught, fish gets hung and dried, fish gets cooked, fish gets eaten. So all of these things you can show in the scene in order to inform the viewer that there is a timeline of these objects in different states. It makes it feel like it's a living, breathing environment, right? And I'm trying to tell a fun little story with one of the octopus that managed to escape from the ship, unlike his other unfortunate brethren who didn't seem to have made it. Because the environment is mostly water too, I think it's reasonable to expect that one of the most popular pastimes here would be swimming. So that's why I decided to do a character that's swimming in the water with a shocked expression on his face. And that's coming from his reaction of seeing one of the kittens just jumping off of the docks for his freedom, escaping from bath time as his mother is desperately trying to get him to come back. And I think it's these little fun stories that make a scene come to life. It makes it feel like there's just so many things happening here. That normal life happens. A lot of these things are more relatable to us. And these are the kinds of things that I look out for and try to implement in my personal work. I try to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, celebrating daily life. Because one of the things with fantasy, with settings, situations that are so epic, it's really hard for me to imagine myself in those situations. But here, I think it just makes it so much easier to project myself into the scenes. And it also becomes an information for the viewer of what they could possibly do when they are in this environment. And I think all these subtle details together with the different activities, and then also all the different weathering in the environment and all the different states of the object, it makes it feel Or should I say, it gives all these breadcrumbs for the viewer, for their brain to feed on and imagine themselves in these worlds. And I think that's where you get those comments that people say, oh, I wish I could be in this world. I wish I could live here. I think you have to give those reasons to your viewers. So one of the best advice that I give to my students, and when I share about how I make my scene so lively, is that I like to talk about the idea of immersing yourself in the scene and thinking about you going through it in a day and night cycle. So imagine yourself starting the day in the morning, what you would do when you'd wake up, what are the sights, sounds, and smell, and what you'd hear in the environment. That will already give you so many more things that you can think about putting in. Because sometimes when we're approaching our art almost as a third person, we approach it a little bit more clinically, or maybe in a little bit more of a detached way. But in the same way, when you are moving into a new place, for example, you'll quickly realize all the daily amenities or furniture that are essential to your daily living that you're missing if you are in that situation. So it's kind of like the same thing. And as you go further throughout the day, throughout the afternoon to the night, and how you end your day, you'll realize that where you should be putting a lot of the objects in your scene, and what position and what states there are. And also with the weathering as well, you'll be able to know where you commonly interact and where the most wear and tear would be. And maybe where the most convenient locations are to put some of the things in your scene. And it becomes much easier and much more fun to approach environments and storytelling. And as I mentioned before, I think the viewers will also really enjoy piecing together all these breadcrumbs that you've been giving to them. Even if we can't put it into words, I think we know instinctually when an environment feels lived in or it feels natural. But we certainly can tell when it doesn't, right? Because after all, environments are just the stage for all the characters and the actors to play on. I still think that you should treat them as if that they're their own characters with their own personality and having their own place in the universe. And I personally just find this process to be a lot of fun. And I think people are able to tell that, right? When an artist is really having fun, they start putting in all these details in the scene that are unexpected, that feel. From this process, not only are you going to be able to come up with a lot more details and a lot more things that make the scene more immersive, it also just makes it more fun. Just to let your imagination run wild and to regain a little bit of that childlike wonderment in our art. And I think that that's such an important thing. Because when you're having fun, the audience will notice it. And when they do notice it, I think that's where they'll really appreciate your pieces a lot more. I do think that a lot of us get into concept art or even art in the first place because we got lost in our own imaginations and just spending many hours daydreaming about our own fantasy world. So why not tap into that a little bit more? Why not bring some of that childlike wonderment back into your own art? Because that will help you not only create more immersive worlds and more sensible designs, it also makes it a lot more fun for your viewers to explore those worlds too. So give this a go, guys, and I hope that it's given you an insight on how I approach environments and how I approach storytelling in general. Would love to know how you get along with that. And if you love to see more of these videos, do let me know. But until the next time, guys, take care, and as always, stay stretchy.